I'd like to now begin the event with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation on whose lands this event is being broadcast today, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands where you are joining us from today. Please feel free if you'd like to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box. And now I'd like to introduce our guest for today, which is Michelle Teear. Michelle Teear is the training manager at Accessible Arts, where she's responsible for the coordination and delivery of their broad range of training programs, including bespoke, in-house, and public courses. Her career includes experience in cultural leadership in the arts, both the private and not-for-profit sector, and success as a visual artist. Tia brings a unique dual perspective to her advocacy work, combining her professional expertise in disability access with her lived experience as a practicing artist. She graduated from the University of New South Wales with a Bachelor of Fine Arts and is a contemporary Australian painter working in oils and egg tempera. She was shortlisted for the Evelyn Chapman Award in 2020 and completed a residency at Bundanon also in 2020, participating in the prestigious Accessible Arts and Bundanon Trust Artist in Residence program. Michelle is dedicated to building a truly equitable and dynamic arts sector that is valued as an integral cornerstone of our culture. Her training work focuses particularly on access riders and workplace inclusion. Through her work at Accessible Arts and as a boots on the ground artist, Michelle has become a leading voice in disability advocacy within the creative industries, combining her artistic practice with her commitment to creating an accessible and exclusive cultural spaces for all practitioners. Michelle, a very warm welcome to First Friday.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you.
Yes. I want to start before we get to your work with accessible arts. I want to start with your background as an artist, so a painter to be precise. How did you fall into that career?
I think it wasn't a matter of falling in, it was a matter of if I tried to avoid it, it kept coming back at me. It was the path I had to take. Um, I always had a strong interest in the arts and pursuing a creative career as an artist. And when I went to art school, straight out of school, I actually went and studied photography. I wasn't ready to paint. Painting is a very deep and introspective process, and I wasn't ready to go there at 19. But then I got on with things and kept thinking about painting, kept trying different options, and at the end of the day, once I got going with it, finally, about less than 10 years ago, it was just meant to be. I've sailed through with that and been very active and productive with that career to date. So it's my love. And despite experiencing barriers, I can't use paint generally. I'm allergic to it. I've had to make my own. I can't use off the shelf stuff. I just found the right people to support that journey. So it's been one of those things. Sometimes I think there's something to do with fate in it. I don't know. It happens.
It does. It does. That's one of your works behind you.
It is one of my works, and I need to hang it a little bit lower because you can't see that starry night sky, but that's of the Pilbara. Um, this is I do a lot of beautiful starry night skies. For me, my practice is about going out to very open, expansive environments because that's the sort of space I want to foster psychologically for myself. And I think in those spaces, it gives us an opportunity to open up our minds, to look outside ourselves, to reframe our social experiences and expectations. So I go out to places like the desert. I'm actually about to go out to Broken Hill for 3 weeks on Monday, which I'm very excited about on an artist residency. And it's a space that I keep getting drawn back to, and I've been out there a few times over the last 5 years, and I think it underpins that practice for me. It's very much a melding between using the landscape as a stepping stone to personal introspection and growth there. So it's a beautiful process to engage with.
You said that you're allergic to paint, so you had to come up with some workarounds for that. And one of them I noticed is that you use egg, which is a very traditional process of painting.
It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. That was just one barrier that you had to overcome. What other barriers did you have to face in becoming an actual practicing artist?
Yeah, well, when I went to university, I was a couple of years into chronic illness with no answers. So I really struggled to get through university. At that point, I knew nothing about disability, about access and inclusion, about asking for supports, nor about what I needed to support myself. So it's been a very long journey, but over time, I've learnt that, once it got to the point where I was like, well, right, I really need to paint now. How do I do that? Because the only thing I could use was watercolor, and I wanted to paint big paintings and serious works. And I just happened to bump into a local Newcastle artist who also has a similar sensitivity to paint, and he was running art classes where nobody was allowed to use anything other than natural paints that he taught us how to make in this class. So it's probably the only class like it in Australia, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. He had a long waiting list, and he said, "You know what? Come, I'm gonna put you into my next class." So that was he's a Peter Lankus. He was a fantastic mentor, and I think that was one of the barriers. How do I go to a painting class? How do I learn to paint? And from there, it's about how do I have the energy and the time, navigating my health and being on and off work in the past. How do I have the time to be able to put into building a career? So it's slowed down. There was a good 10 years between leaving art school and actually just going to a painting class and doing the thing I really wanted to do there. So, I think part of the reason I didn't do painting at uni too was I didn't have the energy to do the hours. Photography was much easier and quicker. So it's a bit of that personal sort of management of crypt time is something that we talk about. I might only have 6 spoonfuls of energy to get through a day, but most people might have 10. So it's about how do I prioritize that to do the basic day-to-day things and still also turn up and do some things like work or follow a career in the arts. And as we know, people with disability are also, we often have lower employment figures and things like that. So there's those financial barriers that I know a lot of creatives also experience. But for the disability community, we get that double whammy in the creative sphere that often we can work less hours, so we earn less. And we're also trying to make a creative career work. So the financial pressures are something I'm continually battling now, which are very, very challenging for many people I know at the moment.
Despite all that, though, having only maybe 6 spoonfuls of energy to the required 10, you then
Yeah.
moved into not just being an artist, but to working also in the creative arts, which is, again, not stable employment for a lot of people. And then you moved into the even possibly more draining field of accessible arts. Or accessibility in the arts? What are the strengths that you think actually got you to where you are now?
I'm so determined and passionate about change. I think advocacy is a natural space for me to work in as an individual. It's very much a personality. I think I'm very aware of what needs to change in society. And I think I get very frustrated seeing things happen when I can see ways that things could happen better. And I think that's, being an advocate, you've got to be able to have that vision for what needs to change. And I found myself already, having some bad experiences at one of our major arts institutions, that's open to the public. It's government funded and had a really bad experience there one day. And I thought, I know this place is committed to access. This isn't cool. So I wrote them an email, and within half an hour, they were on the phone to me saying, thank you for sending that email because this is something we're trying to change systemically in our organization. You've just given me a tool to advocate for that. So I think I was very determined to speak up. And when I went on the Bundanon residency, I was introduced to accessible arts. And accessible arts is the peak body for arts and disability in New South Wales. So once I met them and got a sense of this community of people with disability working together in the creative fields, wanting to make change, yeah, I had to jump on the board and get in there. And you know what? I have a little bit more than 6 spoons of energy today. So I will
That's
admit
good.
I do a lot now. But you know what? The work is energizing too because it's just we're change making, and it's very exciting to be working in this space.
Okay, yeah. Without naming names, what was the experience at this institution
Yeah, well, it's a
that sort
really
of
great
sparked this?
question. That's
Mhm.
a great question. So, Major Art Gallery, and they they have a partner who operates a cafe there. And unfortunately, they also, I have to bring my own food because of allergies. I can't eat out in cafes. They're just unable generally to provide for my dietary requirements. It's too much for risk. So I'm there with a friend. I want to sit down and eat lunch. It's a rainy day. I can't go and eat in the park. And I say, great, where are we going to sit in the gallery to eat our lunch that's appropriate? There's a cafe, but next to it is just some general seating. But the cafe does serve this area too, but it's not strictly within their remit. So I thought that should be okay. It's actually their members area. So that will be fine. So I sit there and eat my lunch, and the cafe owner comes over and was quite stern that I shouldn't be eating my own food there. And I tried to explain, and she talked over me, and it was a pretty bad encounter. It was really made me feel quite upset, having a lovely day and that in the middle of it. So yeah, I wrote that letter and had a beautiful response from the institution.
Because you are in your career, you've been very committed to the idea of voice,
Yep.
speaking up. Um, what is the major barrier that you think most people have about actually demanding
Mm.
things that they need, things that they want, or demanding simply to be heard?
I think that's an excellent question, and I've just had to do a little bit of advocacy in another space myself this morning. And you know, even as an advocate, I still find this challenging because there's the fear that you will be ostracized, I think is the thing. You can feel very alone. And that's why it's so important that we do this collectively. Because if we're not, it's very hard for an individual voice to always be heard. It's very easy for people to speak down to an individual voice. If we work collectively, all of a sudden that changes the dynamics. And you've got a group of people saying, hey, this needs to change. So we're no longer, we might still be a minority, but not as much in that sense.
Mhm.
So there's support, there's collective support. And there's been studies around this, around if one person starts doing a bit of a funny dance at a festival, people kind of look at them and go, oh, what's that? But if somebody else joins in, all of a sudden, everybody else swarms towards it. So I think advocacy can work a little bit like that. People know what needs to change, people know what's not working for them. But often as individuals, we're in a world which isn't built for people with disability. And that's not, you know, that's just an observation. It's not a judgment on society. I think society is learning about the breadth of people in our world and what we need to support everyone's inclusion. At the moment, we do, you know, about this much quite well at including people, but the breadth of everybody in our society sits out much broader than that. And we're still learning how do we cater to this part. So I think it's a big, I've forgotten your original question, but it's a big learning question. It's a big learning process for us as
Yeah.
a society and as an individual. Yeah, we need to work collectively to make change.
And as you said, a lot of the times when you do this self-advocacy, the response is not rejection, is it?
It's not. It's not. Actually, you know what? Within the arts, out of all the spheres, the arts is, I think, and not surprisingly, the most open to change, the most open to new ideas. The arts is a space of curiosity. And I think when I'm working with an advocate, as an advocate, the first thing that I do is bring curiosity to a space. How could things be different? So often the responses I get are actually fantastic. More often than not, when I ask the questions, I get a wonderful response. I've just been working with the Broken Hill Arts Exchange to arrange my art residency. They've had a whole detailed list of access requirements for me to do with accommodation, transport, what products are available in the kitchen. They have been wonderful. And I think, I don't know what their education or understanding is about disability, but they have just been, we want to support you to be here. It's really important that I'm joining that residency, and they've done everything they can. So yes, I think a lot of the time people are scared to speak up, and you might get a response that isn't what you want, but you might be surprised. Yeah.
Indeed. And one of the things that you've particularly energized by is the rider, which, and the fact that there were access riders was news to me until
Mm.
we really met. Um, my understanding of riders really only came from the rock and roll business, where bands demanded a whole range of things that were possibly not conducive to a healthy lifestyle, and more and more flamboyant. You know, the more famous you were, the more you could demand. I'm assuming an access rider is not like that.
It's not, and I used to work in a festival space and saw what some of the people put on their riders. So they are a bit of a giggle when you get that little insight into what people want. You know what? The difference between a rock star's rider and an access rider is that the rock star has a wish list. For an access rider, this is our not negotiables. This is what I need to be able to show up and to work with you, or to go to that residency, or to work with that publisher, and to have, accessible communication or whatever it is that you need. So I think access writers are very exciting. It's something I've developed with Accessible Arts over the last few years. We've actually got a free access writer course coming up. I believe it's October. I didn't write the date down. It's going to go on our website very shortly. I think it's mid-October. If I'm right, it's the 16th. And you can come along to that for free, for creators with disability, and learn about how to write an access writer and how to self-advocate in detail. And you'll get a template and everything. But our access writers, they're basically a document that allows us to communicate what we need effectively. And you can turn that into whatever you want it to be. I've got various different versions of mine. I've got some that I'll use for an art residency where they need to know about my accommodation and travel requirements. I've got one for my desk job workplace, like Accessible Arts. What do I need them to do for me? And I go from everything. It can include things like dietary requirements if they ever need to cater for you. It's got things, what do I need in the environment in my office? What does my desk look like? I've got all sorts of fancy things on my desk here, that I've been provided through Job Access, some very alternative versions of mouses and things like that. So, it can even just be preferred communication methods. So there's many different things that you can put on there. Anything that you need to be able to do your best work should go on your access rider, and be very clear about what you need. So not talking about the problem, talk about what the solution is. And then you can have a conversation with whoever you're working with. And that document can be the first point of conveyance of that information. And then you can have a convo. How are we going to work together? How can you meet these requirements? What is that going to look like in this situation?
Yeah. Do you remember your first rider?
Yes, I didn't know about them, interestingly. And I was trying to get some work when I was getting well enough to start applying for jobs again. And I thought, how am I going to do this? If they don't meet my access requirements, I'm not going to be able to show up to work. So I thought, well, I guess I'll write some things down that I need. And then I started doing a bit of research, and I noticed there was something called workplace adjustments. And basically, that's what your access writer is asking for, certain workplace adjustments. And that is a legal requirement in Australia. It's in our legislation that it is a requirement of businesses to provide workplace adjustments, at least for employees. It's a little bit more tricky when you're a contractor. There aren't the same protections. But I certainly always set out the same expectations of anyone that I'm working with.
Yeah. And you sort of hinted there that the rider is not the end of the conversation.
No, it's just the starting point. So we can go, great, these are the things that I need, but how it gets implemented in every situation is going to be different. Some things they might not be able to do, or they might have to find a creative way to do. I think it's really important to acknowledge that access requirements can conflict. So if you're in a workplace where somebody's got an access requirement that might conflict with yours, then that's tricky. So, I've actually in a workplace at the moment, this isn't accessible arts, so don't worry, I'm not disclosing anybody's stuff, but I'm sensitive to perfume. So everybody in the office knows not to wear perfume, but we have somebody there, but because of their disability, they can't shower every day. So they wear perfume because, that becomes necessary for them. So, we know that when she's there, we're in different rooms and we keep our distance from each other. So it's a bit of a compromise, but we work around it.
Yeah. What advice would you have for writers in particular who
Yeah.
are nervous about advocating for their needs or um, have never used an access rider?
I think the most important thing you can do is to first of all surround yourself with community and support yourself by connecting with others, talking about it. Have a conversation. That's what we do in our Access Rider workshop is we get people together and we talk about it. We can share our fears. We can talk about, hey, what if this happens? And then also do your homework. Be aware of what your rights are. So go to the Australian Human Rights Commission website. That will detail in simple terms your rights for any workplace. And I think whether you're a contractor or whether you're an employee, I always go for the employee rights, although they may not be able to be enforceable. I think still apply that framework to your expectations. So be armed with that knowledge and know if you have a look through the Australian Human Rights Commission that they are there to support you. If somebody isn't actually fulfilling their legal obligations, you can also go back and say, hey, I'm having trouble here, and they will go and advocate on your behalf. So they can actually enact the legislation on your behalf, which is the Disability Discrimination Act. So that legislation is very important because it is our safeguard against discrimination in the workplace.
What can organisations do to encourage or support those who might have access riders or might have different needs?
Yep. There are many things that our organisations and businesses can do to support. And the first thing I would say is understand your obligations under Australian law. I think a lot of organisations and businesses aren't fully aware of their obligations to be as accessible as possible. Obviously, we've all got resources to work within. So what that looks like for every organisation is different, and every organisation is on a different journey. Best practice is if you've got the resources is to develop a disability inclusion action plan. And this is basically sets out a list of things that your organisation has developed a strategy around to implement to support access and inclusion. What's great about a DApp, and if you can't do the full DApp, you can really just do a mini version for yourself in-house. It's basically just a set of intentions, and it looks at things like accessible employment. It looks at, how do we have accessible systems and processes, communication, how do we generally include everybody in the work that we do? So it's about knowledge and intent. And I think businesses can make a strong commitment through these sorts of processes to become an ally. So get out there and really make an effort to engage with the disability community if you aren't already actively doing that
Mhm.
in all areas of your work. And make sure that your employment processes are accessible so that you've got that representation within your organisation as well.
Are there places where you can go to find these groups, the people like groups that you can link to?
Yeah, good question. There is community out there. I think I found my community through my workplace. Accessible Arts, we do run a whole range of programs, which is about connecting people with each other, people in the same situation. I highly recommend checking them out. The Bundanon residency, which we mentioned, that's actually happening this year, I think, this month, I believe. That one will come up again next year for application. So that was where I found my first community of artists with disability. There's a writer's house there, so it's a beautiful, incredible residency. And you'll be there with a group of 5 artists with disability. So there's also, we run a few other programs such as Ripple, which is a culturally and linguistically diverse internship for creatives with disability. That one, if you're working a little bit more outside just the publishing industry, has options to support writers in terms of providing mentoring and internship with various arts organisations in New South Wales. We do have, if you're also looking a little bit outside, like into the screenwriting or things like that, we've got Creatability, which is designed as an accessible pathway into the industry. So that one will again support you with a group of people. And Next Level is another internship program that we run. So you can find out all this on our website. They're all about creating accessible pathways into the industry and creating connection. So we end up with these wonderful groups of people who are connected with each other. And I know the people I found about 5 years ago are still firm friends of mine and have been essential to supporting my career. Outside of that, come along to our events. If you can get there in person, we have the opportunity to be in a room full of creators with disability. I don't know where else you would get that. You might have 100 people there. We have free food and drink. Who doesn't love that? And you get to come and connect. And, some of the most deep, profound conversations have come out of our events. They're free. And we actually have one coming up, which I highly recommend you all get along to in a couple of weeks. It's at the Campbelltown Arts Centre, but you can also attend online if you can't make it. And it's called Reclaiming Words. This is going to be a fantastic panel, including Hannah Davini, Robin Eames, Dr. Aya Webb, and it's emceed by the lovely Maeve Marsden from the Varuna National Writers House. So that's just a little segment of what we do as an organisation to create spaces for community. And I think another great space is just jumping online, finding that community online. I've found Facebook groups for local, like for me, it was chronic illness groups that I connected and made many friends through in my local region in Newcastle. So those sorts of spaces have been very important to me. And I've found sort of creative subgroups in there too of artists as well. So I think there's many places to find community. And I think that's just one of the most important things that I've done to support my career trajectory, is to be able to have that base to support me making those decisions along the way, and not to feel alone with it. We can bounce all the ideas off each other and learn from one another.
Okay, I'd like to move. So we've been speaking here mainly about working within the sector, being a professional or a semi-professional or a practicing creative within the sector. I'd like to now explore about how disability is represented within the creative output of our culture, and why it's so important that writers with a disability are actually the driving voice within representation.
Absolutely. I was just looking up the latest statistics on this, and generally across the board, across the creative arts, artists, including writers with disability, are underrepresented in terms of our voices in the arts. So we know that we're 21.5% of the population in the latest Australian Bureau of Statistics figure, ABS figures. But I think we sit at the moment, about 5 or 6 years ago, it was sitting at about 9%. We've actually come up to 16 point something percent now. I think it's about 16.5%. So that's a big improvement. Very, very promising. Interestingly, within the literary sector, it's sitting at 20%. So not far below representational levels. What I don't have figures on is how many stories actually represent disability, say in the main characters in Australian writing. I don't know if there's any figures on that. I do know in the screen industry, we're well underrepresented there in terms of stories that feature a main character in Australian dramas. Off the top of my head, I believe those figures are sitting around 6% now of Australian dramas have a main character with disability. But that has come up and from about 3% about 6 years prior. So we're trending in the right direction, but I think still the number of stories that represent our lived experience are certainly not enough. And the importance of representing disabled stories, is a massive game changer. I think this is where we change attitudes and culture. I cannot stress how important it is that we share authentic stories, because if people can read about what it is to live with disability, to have those experiences, and to also see us as people with full and complex lives that aren't just defined by our disability, but also understand concepts like disability pride. This is where we can get this across in our stories, in our writing. So I think the way that we change community attitudes is that we bring them into our world and we say, hey, this is what my experience is. We know that we need equitable representation of diverse communities. Otherwise, the voices that are heard are overrepresented. And it skews our society's understanding of ourselves. And we also know that when we can see ourselves represented, and in our media that we consume, that's incredibly important for our sense of belonging to our communities as well.
How would you advise a writer who has portrayed, say, a main character who's living with a disability, and a publisher wants to sort of soften that? What would
Mm.
be your approach?
I would ask very direct questions, but that's me. I would say why? Why do you want to soften that? Why do we want to soften the reality that of what having disability might be? What are they scared of? Um, so I would ask some direct questions and then maybe show some good examples of some successful
Mhm.
writers that have put disability front and center and why that succeeded. I think we are seeing a shift in our cultural expectations, just from those statistics in the last 5 years. We are seeing a shift. I think disability is often the last sort of not to compare, but I am the thing that's often thought about when it comes to diverse communities. I think it's the hardest one for us to come around and understand how do we really include us as a community. But it's also interesting because we're one of the biggest minority groups. And we're also one of the minority groups that pretty much everybody has the potential of joining us at some point. The rate of disability as you get older is, of course, higher. So I think it's an interesting one when you hear a response like that, is to say why. Really ask them to explain that to you.
Yeah. And as you said at the start, when you have these questions, you probably shouldn't go in with the expectation that the response is always going to be an aggressive no.
No, no. I think be curious. Um, I think that's the most important thing is actually use this as an opportunity to get somebody to really think, because they may be coming from a very genuine point of view that they feel is in your best interest and in the best interest of the work. So I think you have the opportunity to go in there and have that discussion with the view that, I think we're always advocating, whether we see ourselves as advocates or not. As people with disability, at some point, we're going to be forced to advocate. As soon as we want to acknowledge our experiences and put that in our work, somewhere along the line, we will have to advocate for protecting the authenticity of that, I think, in reality, because not everybody will understand what that's about and what we're trying to achieve with it. So I think we need to go in there, we're not there in a battle. We're there to go, okay, that's really interesting. I want to understand your perspective. Let's not expect that there's always a no. It might be a maybe. It might be a okay, I see that. How do we move around that? Where do we find a middle ground? Or how do we where is your hard line on compromise? I think that's what's most important here, is know where it's compromising the authenticity of your work or moving towards tokenism, which is something we really don't want to do, towards this is where I can tolerate anything outside of this starts to become inauthentic. And that's where you don't want to move, I think, as a writer. If we're moving outside of what we feel is authentic representation of our experience, then that's a problem. And we don't want to do that because that can be damaging to basically people's understanding of the community.
Yeah. Looking at authentic voices and authentic representation, writers with not living with a disability, how do they represent the full experience of a community that they want to show that may include, and you would maybe say should include,
Mhm.
people living with a disability? How do they do that ethically and empathetically?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think I encourage everybody to consider this in your work and to not be scared off by it because it can be daunting because they could feel like, oh, there's a lot of responsibility on me to do this well. And there is, but I think the most important thing is that you make sure that you're telling that perspective authentically. And to do that, you need to do that in collaboration with people with disability. So work with somebody who has a relevant lived experience that you want to represent in your work to really engage with them and their broader community to understand what that is. I think if you're going to write about disability and do it really ethically, is you need to do that from the perspective of as being an ally. So make yourself an ally first, be fully engaged in that community, make friends, know how to be an
I was going to
advocate.
ask, how do you know you're an ally? It's easy to say you're an ally. It's easy to say. These are the
Yeah,
questions you have to answer, Michelle. I'm sorry,
yeah,
but
I
like
know.
it's easy to say. And as you sort of hinted, like from my experience of living and working in the arts now for a long time, it is full of fantastic people.
Yeah,
But being a fantastic person doesn't mean you always are doing the right thing. So,
no,
yeah. So, how do you know that you're an ally? How do you know that you're doing the right thing? Are there some tools? Are there some steps? What do you
I
do?
think you need to be proactive all the time. If you're not being proactive about being an ally, if you're like, I know, if you're sort of, like, yes, of course, I respect people with disability, and whenever it comes up, I act appropriately. That's good. That's a great place to start. But being an ally is about doing something proactively. It's actually about doing. An ally isn't a static thing. So I think if you're going to consider yourself an ally, it is about what are you doing actively on a regular basis to be engaged with that community, to stay up to date, because what is considered inclusive is always changing. Like we had a conversation about how language is always evolving. Um, I think you need to be up on the current issues that affect the disability community so that this takes work. To be an ally, it takes work. I think we can say I respect diverse people or people with disability, but to be an ally, you need to be, follow people on social media with disability, learn about their lives, read books, engage with media, attend exhibitions, make friends with people with disability within whatever sphere that you're working with, actively engage with that community. We are 20% of the population, so we're not too hard to come and find. You're going to have to try hard to avoid it. So I think those are the things that I would recommend, is the difference between being inclusive and being an ally.
Yeah. Do you think it would be acceptable for, say, a writer to give their work to someone living with a disability and ask them to check it?
Yes, I think I would suggest, though, what I always say is that if you're going to create a work that is about disability, is you need to involve people with disability from the start.
Mm.
Before you pick up the pen, you've just at that idea start is engage people with disability. Because if you want to tell that story authentically, you need to be having those conversations regularly as you write it. So don't write it and then go, hey, can you check this? Because there's a good chance they'll pull it apart and you'll be starting again unless you really are well informed about what you're doing beforehand. So I would suggest get somebody on board early or work in more of a collaborative fashion. Think about what that could look like. How do you collaborate with somebody? You might be the author, but how do you let them collaborate on that story?
Yes, yes. No, I mean, and that's in common for all sorts of minority groups or when you're not part of that community, you do really need to be connected to that community in order to even begin to start to represent them adequately. Now, you've said many times that people living with a disability make up 20%
Yep.
of the audience of our community. That's a sizable audience.
Yep.
What can writers of all persuasions and living with disability or not, what can they do, say, on their social media, on their website, where they actually put out their work for people to see? What can they do to make it easier for people living with different types of disability to actually engage with their work, whether or not it's about disability, just as part of the community and part of the audience and part of the people that you're trying to reach, and maybe one day maybe trying to sell your work to, maybe they'll buy your book, what can they do in their sphere to make them more engaging and more open to people with living with a disability?
Yeah. I think there's quite a few different angles to this. I think, first of all, it is about, again, understanding what inclusion looks like. So even if you're not writing about disability, it sometimes comes up in books, even if they have no references to disability, there could be a word there that's just meant as a metaphor that might actually accidentally be a slur to the disability community. That there's lots of examples like that in language. So educate yourself around language to make sure you're not adding any of those things in there unwittingly. Educate yourself about language. And then the next step I would suggest is understanding that multiple formats, so this is where you can work with your publishers, is multiple formats are what will make work more accessible to more broader audience. So, all those things that are available, large print books, audio books, ebooks, those sorts of options are fantastic if we can also look at that type of thing. Um, I think that's sort of, you can also look at, some of the crux of what makes accessible. Writing is things like metaphors can be really complex. They can also be beautiful. So you can start to understand some of the concepts of plain text. Now, I'm not suggesting we want to write every novel in a plain text way, but you could think about how do I think of my writing in a way that somebody might need, if it's very long sentences, if it's very complex metaphors and things like that, these can be barriers to people understanding the work. So plain language and plain text uses things like shorter sentences, or you can even just have at the back of your book, you could have some explanations for some of the metaphors. You can have a footnote that explains it. So adding in extra information to support people who might say, I don't understand that word. There's a complex word in there that's maybe not used in general English regularly. So things like that. You can provide extra information, definitions, just to help people out who might need that information to make that book something that they can engage with.
Okay. What about on websites? So there's some things some simple things that writers with websites can do to make those more accessible?
Absolutely. So going back to that plain text, I would always say make your website plain text so that that's an accessible in. So also using some accessible font. So high contrast, like white text on a black background, black on a white background. You can use colors, but use a color contrast analyzer tool. You can get that from Vision Australia. If you go to their tools, they can have a whole range of tools to work out accessible colors and things like that. It's a color contrast analyzer from Vision Australia. That's a good place to start using sans serif fonts. So like Arial, not Times New Roman. I always swapped them around the wrong way. Have I got that right? That's the sans serif font,
Yeah.
Arial.
Serifs have
Um,
a little feet on them.
that's
That's
right.
technical
No feet.
understanding.
Yeah, no feet.
Yeah.
And then, just looking at the usability of your website. So how many click-throughs is it to get to different parts? Having a fairly, don't have, I have to click through 5 different layers of pages to get to this one bit of info, make it a bit less clicking, make it avoid long scrolls. That can be a barrier to people. So having some links that will drop you down to where you need to go in the page if it is a long page. Other information, if you're going to have any events, you can have some information on your website about how accessible that event is going to be. Give us some venue information, things like that is great. Or where can I get you more information? Um, Also looking at the font size, so minimum 12-point font is great. And you can also get some fantastic like little widgets that are accessibility toggles for your website. So if somebody has finds that yellow text or yellow background with a black text is more accessible, you can use a toggle to change that or the font size and make it bigger. And you also want to test your website for screen reader use. So screen readers, you can just jump into your web browser and hit the read aloud function and test your website. Make sure that it actually reads everything on it and in the correct order. And if it doesn't, then you might want to get in touch with whoever designed your website or read up a little bit about how to format it so that screen readers can actually pick up your titles and differentiate between a title and a body text and things like that.
Yes. And as we said, like 20% of the community is a sizable audience that you should probably think about targeting.
Absolutely. Very important. Very important that everybody feels included. And I think the beauty of it is when everybody can participate and feel fully included is that we become a more connected and enriched community. So yeah,
Okay. Well, talking about being included, we'd really like now to get people who are in the audience who might have questions of their own. You can either type it into the chat or simply use the raise hand emoji and turn on your microphone and ask the question. So if you do have something, just let us know and we'll get to it. But before we get to those. What has been the greatest change in your professional career in the creative industries? And what is one change that is still yet to be made?
what has been the greatest change in my career in terms of seeing change in access,
Yes.
you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. That's a tricky one. What's been the biggest change? Well, you know what? In the time that I started, I've been with Accessible Arts for about 3 years now, so working professionally as an advocate. I think just seeing that shift in representation has increased. The level of knowledge in the industry has increased. The questions, I just ran a workshop a few weeks ago it was a national workshop. We had organizations from around the country. The level of knowledge, we weren't at beginner level anymore. We have been doing this for years and we now need to know the next steps. We're getting down to the fine detail. And that was the most incredible space because there was so much learning happening, not just from myself and my other presenter, but the sharing between the organizations of their knowledge because they're the ones who are doing it. We're staying up to date on what's happening in best practice, but they're the ones who are putting it into practice. Was phenomenal. And it warmed my heart because, that in 3 years that's happened, which is amazing. So we've got a bit of work to do now to keep up with people's knowledge.
Yeah.
So I'm really heartened by where we're going with the arts industry.
Do you have like an example of what you're talking about? Think I understand about like you're not at the beginner steps, that you're now doing
Yeah.
the details.
So
So what were you talking about 3 years ago that you've now is I'm assuming common knowledge. Would that be the correct phrase?
Yeah, I don't think it is everywhere. There are definitely organizations and individuals at all different points of learning. So I think beginner knowledge is understanding things like the social model of disability, where we understand that that we all have a responsibility to make our world more accessible. It's not down to the individual with disability to navigate those barriers on their own. It's up to all of us to change our society to make it inclusive. So I think that's sort of beginner level conversation. When we're coming in the room and they've already said, well, we've been running this, this one, I'm going back to that workshop. There was an exhibition design workshop where we've been running this exhibition that's we've made very accessible, but we're working with venue partners who don't know how to do that. So we're getting to that level of conversation. So how can we support the venue partners who have different, barriers within how they work and their venues and blah, blah, blah. So we're getting into the nitty-gritty of how to do these things on a finite level. So they've done it, they've done some best practice, and now they're hitting some next level hurdles. And how do we problem solve that collectively as an industry? Is the interesting thing. And they're already coming up with the solutions. So we're just providing that extra level of guidance now. Instead of going, well, here's all the things you can do. They already know that. So now we're helping them problem solve the nitty-gritty of how to implement those things.
Okay, excellent. Sometimes it is quite humbling to see how quickly we can progress in some areas, um, and then sort of rue that we don't progress so quickly in others.
Yeah.
What then is still to be done?
Many things, many things. I think what I would love to see is that there is a thorough commitment across the arts industry to access and inclusion. It's not there across the board yet, but it is largely there. And I think
What would
that,
that look like? Sorry.
yeah, what would that look like? I think that would look like everybody having that baseline knowledge of access and inclusion. So understanding the social model, understanding that obligation as an organization, as an individual, as an artist, as a writer, of what we can do and what access and inclusion actually looks like in practice. And then actually making a commitment to doing things every year, making a commitment to making access and inclusion at the front and center of everything you do. Every conversation you have about anything, whether it's we're going to run this program or I'm going to write this book, one of the first things that come up in planning, the first steps is, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this. We need budget, we need these people, we need these skills, and how are we going to include people with disability? It should always be on the table in a conversation. I think that's where we need to go. That needs to be the standard.
Mhm.
There's certain legislation, like with councils and things like that now coming in where they all have to have a DAP with our government organisations. This needs to just become the norm across the board.
Yes. No, excellent. We do have one question coming in so far, and please, if you do
Yeah.
have more from the audience, it's from Anna. And Anna is coming to terms with their late term diagnosis of AUDHD, and just understanding that she's lived with this for her entire life without knowing it. What advice do you have for someone like her who hasn't even thought about joining the community because didn't realize that they were part of that community?
Yeah. I remember, I've had chronic illness since my teens. And so that's over 25 years, not giving away my age here, but and it was only about 5 years ago when I saw that Bundanon residency advertised and it said, well, it's for artists with disability. And I had to go, oh, I haven't really thought about that term before. What does that mean? And am I part of that community? I knew I identified as part of the chronic illness community, but disability. And I thought, well, actually, yes, I can call myself disabled. I've got a modified car that I can claim that I'm disabled. I didn't really know what that community was like, and I didn't really know if they'd include me. And I think that was the thing. And as soon as I got to that residency, I went, oh, these are my people. There was other people there with similar conditions. We just swelled together like glue. It was a beautiful thing. And I would say to you that take that step to step into the community and know that we are very welcoming of everyone. We don't judge. It doesn't matter how you identify what your condition is. If you say you're disabled and you're part of us, you will have that lived experience and shared experience, and we welcome you. So I think take that step to connect with community and feel that support network that we can offer you, because I think it's a game changer to step into that space and to hear other people talk about the same challenges that you may have experienced yourself, particularly if you can connect with creatives with disability, because you don't feel alone, and it makes it much easier to problem solve those things and not see it as a negative, but to start to see disability with a sense of pride and to own your experiences. Because I don't want to live with chronic pain for a moment longer, but I'm proud of who I am, and who I am includes those experiences of disability and how I navigate the world. So I'm proud of that. So I think, it's a beautiful thing to take that step. So I encourage you to do that and find your way into the community.
And I'm hearing an echo of something you said almost at the start, that when you ask the questions, you'll often get a kind answer.
Yes. People know what you've been through because they've done it themselves. So people want to support one another. I think of course, we're a very inclusive community, and yeah, that's right. You can expect that kind answer. Don't be fearful, because I know what it's like, and you'll probably be very surprised.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Anna. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, Michelle, that's all the time that we have, unless there is a late incoming question. Um, then I want to thank everyone for being here with us today. It was great to see the people online, and for those who had questions or who had comments, thank you very much. Heartfelt thanks to you, Michelle, for sharing both your experience and your expertise, and really getting us to think about what it means to be part of a community that includes people of all different life experiences, and how we need to accommodate for everyone and to include everyone and to let others have voices where their voices need to be. If you're not already subscribed to Newsbite, which is our weekly email newsletter that lets you know when events such as this are taking place, as well as all the other services we offer and opportunities for writers across Sydney and New South Wales. Please make sure you do so. Details are on our website. Our next First Friday is going to be the 3rd of October with Anna Berkey of Australia Reads. So we are moving away from the writing to the reading and to the understanding of audience, which has been a little bit of what we've been talking about here today. Again, thank you very much, Michelle. It has been absolutely fascinating. It's a delight to talk to you, and we do wish you very well in your 3-week residency out at Broken Hill.
Thank you so much. It's absolute pleasure to be able to come and discuss this with you here today, Andrew. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for being in the room today.
Okay, thank you very much, and we will see you at the next one. Everyone have a safe and pleasant weekend. Goodbye.